Hey, well, good morning. One thing, that the folks at this church know is that belief systems come from a lot of places. We draw from many sources to inspire our path, and today I'd like to start by reading the second of the six sources that Unitarian Universalism uses to draw its wisdom from. It reads, "Words and deeds of prophetic people which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love." I might like that one like the best of the six sources because to me it sounds like it's talking about heroes. And, we might normally think it means real prophetic people from the holy books and the history books, but today I'm going to talk about somebody from a comic book, and I think it might still apply. Every fictional story that was ever told came from a real person who could have been prophetic and could have been challenging us through some character they created, the story they're telling. And there are reasons that some characters have stayed with us for a very long time. We believe in those characters. Maybe not believe that they're real, but believe in what they stand for. I believe in Superman, that strange visitor from another planet with powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men, as they described him in that 1950s TV show. Even though I don't believe he's a real person, I believe in what he represents, what he means to us, and I think that's important and even helpful. But Superman's been around a lot longer than I have, so let's take a quick look back to see how he got there. Before June of 1938, there was no Superman. Who could you read about if you were looking for a heroic figure before 1938? Well, 25 years earlier, in 1903, there was first a stage play, and then quickly after that a novel about someone called the Scarlet Pimpernel, who was a mysterious figure during the French Revolution who saved French aristocrats from the guillotine. Now, the Scarlet Pimpernel was a lot of fun, if you've never read him, because he was out there, saving the aristocrats, but when he wasn't saving aristocrats, he was Sir Percy Blakeney, who was kind of Scarlet Pimpernel's version of Clark Kent. Sir Percy was a silly, cowardly fop. He was like this spinely, lazy bit of English pomp and fussiness, and he drove his wife crazy because he was the exact opposite of the Scarlet Pimpernel. Now, I am almost certain that Ma and Pa can't give little Clark Kent a copy of that book that he could base Clark Kent on later, but that's because it works so well like that. About a decade after Scarlet Pimpernel came out, we got Tarzan, who was a man who landed in a world that he wasn't born in and was raised by the locals, but had abilities from where he came from to help his new family. I mean, Tarzan was pretty much the Superman of the apes for the jungle. More years pass, we get Zorro, another hero with a secret identity that his secret identity was so ineffectual and silly that, he couldn't be the brave guy riding through the night fighting the, powers that be in that time. Another 10 years go by, we get a super strong sailor who is affected by something green. It's Popeye and his spinach. It's the exact opposite of kryptonite, but the seeds are still there. And then in the 1930s, it all just starts rolling in. We get the Shadow, we get Conan the Barbarian, we get the Lone Ranger, Flash Gordon, the Green Hornet, the Phantom. And there's two heroes I want to specifically call out in the 1930s. The first was Hugo Danner, who was the hero of Philip Wiley's novel Gladiator. Hugo Danner's father injected Hugo with a super serum before he was even born, and he grew up super strong. He had skin so tough that bullets and bayonets couldn't penetrate it. And in the novel, Hugo Danner started fighting Germans in World War I, and he was on the verge of getting on a plane and just going, I'm going to just fly to Berlin and just end it all. And then the Treaty of Versailles got signed, and he didn't have to go do that. The second hero of the 1930s I'd like to talk about was Doc Savage, who was in the Pulp Fictions of the time. He was another product of scientific experiments where He was a child who was raised to be scientifically the perfect human being. He was another sort of Superman, but it was interesting because his first name was also Clark, and he had a secret retreat in the Arctic he called his Fortress of Solitude. The very year that book came out, that had Doc Savage with his Fortress of Solitude in it, that was 1938. There was a writer named Jerry Siegel and an artist named Joe Shuster who created Action Comics #1, and the little baby named Kal-El, who was placed in a spaceship on the doomed planet of Krypton and sent flying toward Earth. And then things changed. We got Superman. Now, I don't want to dwell on all the superpowers that baby Kal-El would eventually get. Over 87 years between comics and movies, he's about had every superpower a hero could possibly have. We all know he can fly, we all know he was strong, he's invulnerable, he has heat vision, but he's also had some weird things like super ventriloquism, or the ability to turn the earth back in time to make some things change but not others, and that really weird thing where he could make Lois Lane forget things just by kissing her, which that's 1980, that's kind of troubling now to think about. But Superman isn't really about his powers. What's important about Superman is his choices. They say that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And Superman basically has absolute power. He doesn't have a boss. He's an independent operator. He's not a vigilante like Batman because as much as he possibly can, Superman plays by the rules. He's the best player in any game, and when you're the best, you don't have to cheat. He doesn't have to do crime to fight crime. Which brings us to a very important point about Superman. He really doesn't fight crime like Batman. He stops crime when he encounters it, but that's just a fraction of his larger job. He's not the police. Superman's more of a fireman. He's a rescue worker. He's here to save people. He's a helper. Back in the early 80s, when that big Superman movie came out, there was a song in there that was full of Lois Lane's thoughts about him, and as she wonders who he is. And the answer in the lyrics of the song, the first answer is, he's just a friend from another star. And that is kind of what he is. Superman is everyone on Earth's friend. He's there when people need him. And that impossible task is really Superman's greatest weakness, if you think about it. Kryptonite gets all the publicity, and sometimes in the comics, magic will mess with Superman. He's not good with magic. But of all the things that can stop Superman, the biggest flaw is that no matter how fast he is, and he's as fast as anyone except the Flash, which I'll argue in Flash's favor if you want to discuss that later, but nobody, not even Superman, can be everywhere at once and save everyone. He wants to, he tries to, but even Superman has limits. And, there's, over time, Superman's such an important character. There's been a lot of other characters that were created that are kind of like Superman copies, just to tell stories you can't tell using Superman. There was an interesting one in a comic called Astro City about a character that was like Superman. His name was Samaritan. And he had this one thing he wanted more than anything else. And finally, as you work your way through the story, you find out what that one thing is. He just wants a day off. He wants a day when he doesn't have to keep saving people all the time, because people need saving all the time, every minute of every day. It's impossible to save them all. Even with, his supervision and super hearing, we know Superman's probably very aware of the people he can't save. It probably has to, he's painfully aware that he's failing as much as he's succeeding. But here's the thing about Superman, that doesn't stop him. He doesn't let brick walls stop him. He doesn't let bullets stop him. He doesn't let failure stop him. And that's not entirely superpower. That's determination. That's doing what you can even when you know you can't do it all. There's two parts to the Superman legend. I've talked about the first part where he's from another planet and he gets powers. The second part is just as important, and that's the Smallville, Kansas part, the Clark Kent part. Superman is not Superman unless he grows up on that farm in Kansas raised by that kindly couple named Jonathan and Martha Kent. They couldn't have kids, and they had this baby literally drop out of the sky in front of them. In most of their depictions, they look like kindly old grandparents. I mean, they're probably, were past the time when they could even have kids. They're like good grandparents. They're seen as kindly and wise and almost like Jedi masters of rural culture. But their personalities are kind of vague for the most part, and there's reasons for that. That way we can imagine our own, how we see these people. In the stories, and there are some few stories out there of Super Baby. Back in the 60s, you could get comics with Super Baby in them, where toddler Clark Kent would somehow decide to tie a red towel around his neck and just get into this super mischief. He was trying to help people, but he was a little toddler. He didn't understand how things worked. And his parents, their whole job was just chasing around after him, trying to cover up the fact that they had this super baby running around. And there haven't been many stories of that lately. But in the 60s, there was even an ongoing Superboy comic about teenage Clark Kent and his girlfriend Lana Lang and the sort of adventures Superman would have if he was going to high school. And interestingly, in 1962, that Superboy comic was the second best-selling comic book in America, right behind Superman. In the early 60s, Superman was the top comic book selling everywhere. And in those comics, Smallville, Kansas is depicted as the perfect American little town, almost like the Kents were the perfect adoptive parents. Superboy has a best friend named Pete Ross who knows his secret identity and, keeps it quiet, helps him out. He's got a girlfriend named Lana Lang who does all the Lois Lane stuff in a small town setting. And if you ever notice the difference, it's Lois Lane, Lana Lang, Lori Lamaris. Every woman in Superman's life that he ever dated or anything is an LL. Which then makes you wonder about Lex Luthor, but that's a whole other thing. Because, back in that 60s world of Smallville and whatever, Lex Luthor was in Smallville, and he was Superboy's biggest fan when they were teenagers, until Superboy saved him from an experiment that he did that went wrong and made him lose all his hair. And that's when he went bad. Because back in the 60s, we thought going bald would turn you evil for some reason. We have a lot of examples of that in movies and stuff. But, we somewhere in the 80s, DC Comics quit telling Superboy stories, and they changed Superman's history so he didn't become a superhero until he was an adult. They wanted to keep the Superboy trademark, so they made this clone, but that's a whole different story. So anyway, the important part of that story, though, is that he had a happy childhood amongst the wheat field of Kansas, which made him the optimistic helper who could go on to solve problems in the big city. There's an old trope that you see in a lot of movies where a person takes their small country self to the big city and straightens out those city folks. Mr. Deeds goes to Washington, or, all of the ones about people going to New York. Now that more people are born in the cities than in the small towns, we aren't seeing that story quite as much as we used to. Smallville becomes almost a mythological place, like Superman's Fortress of Solitude, a special place he has just because he's Superman. And, there's generations of us that have farms in our past somewhere that they're going, those generations are going to be gone soon. So we have to find something else in Superman we can relate to besides him being a farm boy who wound up going to the big city. Well, and one of those things, he's our most popular flying superhero. It's what you pick out first when you're a kid. You might tie a towel around your own neck or a sheet or something like Superman's cape and just see if there's any chance you can actually fly. A lot of kids learn about gravity this way. And if they're lucky, they don't break anything or jump a little too far. But that dream of flying stays with us once it takes root. I remember this time, one of my first times in New York, and I was there in, central Manhattan, looking up at that narrow strip of sky that's above you, and I suddenly understood Superman completely. It's like you feel this urge just to fly up and get up to that sky like we have here, where we have sky everywhere. And it helped me understand the character of Superman. And that whole image of a person somehow appearing in the sky above us. It's kind of a magical thing. I mean, angels, gods, visions. It becomes really obvious when you read Superman comics or see stuff that the people of Metropolis are so grounded, so not very religious, so not very imaginative, because what is it that they say? Look up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's Superman. Nobody's going, it's an angel. It's the god Apollo. It's Peter Pan. It's like, no, they're pretty, birds, planes, normal flying stuff. And yet, Superman is one of those things to us. We don't live in Metropolis. We live in Peoria, or the surrounding area. Anybody flying around Peoria would be a miraculous thing, because Superman is basically a miracle. He's the dream of a kind of guardian angel we would want to have that helps us, looks out for us. He's the hope that someone is out there to help us when things look dark. After World War II, it was often said that Superman stood for truth, justice, and the American way. And that was back before some, not so nice folks started claiming the American way was being in favor of a bunch of bad stuff, hiding behind a flag. But we won't go there right now because we're talking about Superman, and Superman is about hope. He's always stood for good things. He's always stood for the best of us. Some of the more recent Superman movies wanted to act like we'd fuss over him for being an alien, which didn't really work real well because he looked like Henry Cavill, and nobody cares where Henry Cavill came from. He's a good-looking, strong guy. We want him on our team. And that's kind of the way Superman, because Superman isn't one of us, he is us. He's a part of our team. We don't have Superman's powers, of course. Our bodies aren't super strong or invulnerable to damage. And we certainly can't fly without some sort of wings, propellers, jets, rockets, etc. Our bodies aren't like Superman, but our spirits? There are times when your spirit has to deflect emotional bullets. There are times when your spirit has to lift impossible weights. And there are times when your spirit just needs to fly. I mean, who do you look to in those moments? Who inspires you to try to a little bit harder, to be just a little bit more? I mean, there's as many answers to that as there are people in this room, but me, I like Superman. Sometimes, when I need to push a little harder, when I need to attempt something I just think is impossible, I try to, get like Superman in my head. I mean, I don't take off my glasses. I don't start unbuttoning my shirt and hoping there's an S under there, because I can't see crap without my glasses. I'm blind as a bat. Unlike Superman, I don't have telescopic, microscopic, X-ray vision, anything. I can't see just a darn thing. But what matters is what you think you can do. What matters is what limits you set for yourself. What matters is thinking beyond those limits and imagining what you could do if you could push yourself past your normal day, past your normal everyday self, just this one time, and then maybe the next time, and maybe the next time after that. Because like I said, we don't have Superman's powers, but we can have his hope that we can make a better world. We can have his belief that humanity is worth saving. And, sometimes the little things, when you have those beliefs, will matter as much as the big things. Superman actually got more cats out of trees than he did stopping asteroids from hitting major cities. Because even, he was always a hero to somebody. Even a little girl with the cat in the tree. He was always just being a helper. And, there's a lot to learn from that. Because even if the world thinks you're a clumsy goof who's somehow never around when the big battles are being fought, like people thought about Clark Kent, you can still have those moments where you rise above and do what needs to be done, even if nobody knows that it's you. Superman didn't really come from some far-off planet named Krypton, after all. He came from human imaginations. And he's still around today because of our imaginations and because we believe in ourselves. And some of us believe in Superman too, and that's a good thing. So that's all I have to say about that, and thank you for coming today.